Ryan Nobles is a correspondent on Capitol Hill for CNN. He's on the line right now. Of course, Ryan, formerly from here. Ryan, by the way, starring down the road and might be making his way back here to the area, Ryan. Is that correct?
What do you mean by that, Bill?
In October.
Oh, in October, yes, yes. I may be making a trip back to see you.
Might be making his way. Might be someone that might be roasting someone.
Awesome.
I thought he was I thought he was coming home because you give out full-size candy bars on Halloween.
Or you convinced him to be our producer,
right.
One of the two.
We do the full-size Snickers at our house. All right, Ryan, one step forward, two steps back, Jekyll and Hyde, but all no big surprise, right? Is it a big surprise that the president went out and went rogue last night?
No, I mean, anytime he's at one of these rallies where he's kind of fueled by his most diehard supporters, that is usually what we end up seeing, and that's exactly what we saw last night. I mean, the most interesting thing that happened last night was when he pulled out the sheet that he had his official statement on in response to Charlottesville, and he read the statement back and left out the most controversial part of it as a way to try and point out that the media covers him incorrectly. And, and so he read the whole statement, but then neglected to point out that he said on many sides 2 different times, which was the piece of information that everyone seemed to criticize him about.
Right. That was the one. Yeah, exactly. That was the one. Those were the words that were the controversial words, and he left them out.
And it's all designed for this bait and switch for his supporters, to make it seem as though he's the victim of unfair coverage and that everyone has given him a poor shake and that he just can't get ahead because everybody's out to get him. And his supporters thrive on that. They believe that he is definitely treated unfairly. They feel they're treated unfairly. And these rallies are an opportunity for them to come together and kind of, moan in that dissatisfaction with their lot in life. And that's what you saw on display there. And that's one of the reasons that I think you're never going to really see this president change course, because he can always get to a rally where 10,000 people will show up and affirm his worldview, and that's really what sustains him and keeps him going in the direction that he is.
It's almost like he does it just to remind Republicans, you getting ready to come out against me? Mitch McConnell, you don't want to talk to me anymore? Look at what I can do. And what's interesting about all of this is he doesn't have the numbers right now. He does not have the numbers to win a general election. And I guess a lot of that depends, as we saw in the last election, who his opponent would be. Clearly, Hillary was a bad candidate, and people, even that didn't support Donald Trump, voted for Donald Trump. But he doesn't have the numbers to win a general election. But where it gets tricky is in the primary, and that's where it's dangerous for Republicans.
Well, I'm actually in North Carolina visiting my parents right now, and my father and I were talking about this last night. I think when you run the risk of analyzing the president's approval numbers, it can kind of send you down a weird path, because his approval numbers have always been pretty poor. He was hovering around the low 40s throughout the entire campaign, right up until Election Day, but then he shocked everyone and still won. And the reason that he won was because his support was strong in targeted areas, in the Rust Belt, in those key swing states, which he overperformed. And he still has relatively strong support among Republicans. 80% of Republicans still support him. So this idea that somehow someone's going to come in and defeat him, I still think is a long shot, because he still has the power of the incumbency. And the biggest thing about Donald Trump was that he benefited from the fact that people weren't really that big of fans of Hillary Clinton. And until either some sort of conservative Republican in the primary process or a Democrat can prove themselves to be a viable alternative to Donald Trump, particularly with these disaffected groups, there's no reason to think that he won't remain president of the United States for the foreseeable future. And at this point, we have yet to find a leader who is willing to stand up and be that alternative that can reach out to all these different groups that are just unhappy with the direction of the country right now.
I got to tell you, Ryan, I could think of 10. And maybe it's just because there were so many people running against Donald Trump. But right now, to say, I could think of 10 people that would be viable candidates to run against Donald Trump. And all 10 of them are Republican. When it comes to the Democrat side, I don't know. Who would be that Democrat that would be that bright person that would. I can't think of anybody. And even if you can come up with somebody, it's still premature, Ryan. You're still like, well, the easy one would be Biden. Who else? Al Gore? I don't think so. Who do you come up with on the Democrats?
Well, the name that will definitely be out there is Bernie Sanders. He's definitely going to run again. He's already making trips to target groups, but that's a problem for Democrats.
No doubt.
That's one of the reasons that Hillary Clinton came into the general election so damaged because of the way that Bernie Sanders drove her to the left. I think the other name that you're going to see emerging is your Senator Kirsten Gillibrand. I think she's going to be a popular pick. I mean, there are names out there, but I have a theory about the Democratic field right now, and I wonder if the Democratic field, there are going to be a lot of these top-tier Democrats, Cory Booker of New Jersey, maybe Kamala Harris of California. These are potentially candidates for president, people that probably really want to be president someday, and I wonder if they say, I'm going to sit 2020 out because I do not want to run the risk of running against Donald Trump and losing. Yeah. Because if I run against Donald Trump and lose again, I will never get the chance to run for president again. And even though he looks like a damaged and wounded candidate, he still has the power of the incumbency. The dynamics of the electorate have not changed all that much. If you're a Democrat whose sole ambition in life is to become president of the United States, why would you take the risk in 2020 when you might have the opportunity at the end of 8 years of Donald Trump? It's a whole different scenario at that point. So, you're right. There is not a clear front runner for the Democratic Party. And as we move forward, people can talk all they want about the potential of Donald Trump either resigning or being impeached. Those are all fantasies at this point. We still don't know what this investigation is going to uncover. The only way that someone's going to get Donald Trump out of office, at least at this point, is by running against him and beating him. Yeah. And for all of Donald Trump's faults, there is no evidence right now that there is any candidate, Republican or Democrat, who has the ability to do that.
Mitch McConnell, we're hearing that they haven't spoken. They got into a big fight. They haven't spoken in 2 weeks. The president alluding to that a little bit yesterday.
Yeah, and, Manu Raji, who's one of my colleagues up on Capitol Hill, has two different sources who said that they had a very uncomfortable phone call at the beginning of August where the president was yelling at McConnell, was mad at him about the fact that the Russia investigation was still going forward. McConnell's clearly disappointed in the president. He voices his displeasure a little bit differently than Donald Trump. He gave a very innocuous speech to a Rotary Club in Kentucky where he said that, the president has kind of excessive expectations, which is as far as he would go. What's interesting about Mitch McConnell's office is they are very close to the vest. He does not make a statement that doesn't have purpose behind it. He never goes off script, unlike Donald Trump. Yeah. They couldn't be two more polar opposite of politicians. So it's not a surprise that they're having a hard time getting along. The problem for both McConnell and Trump, though, is they need each other if they hope to get anything done. Yeah. And if this continues to be a growing acrimony between the two, it is going to be a long 3 more years of the Trump presidency. Because if you think he hasn't been able to get anything done now, if he loses Mitch McConnell, he won't get anything done the rest of his presidency.
Yeah. Which came first, the chicken or the egg? The president last night really blaming the media and all of this. And what people will say that defend the president is, have you ever seen a president who has been hyper-focused on like this president? And you have to say to that, well, no, I haven't. But my question to you is, which came first, the chicken or the egg?
Mm-hmm. Right. Yeah, I mean, I think our coverage is driven by what people are interested in, right? Yeah. I mean, we wouldn't take the president's entire speech if people weren't going to watch it, and if he wasn't going to make news. Those two things happen every time he speaks. He's always going to make news. Most of the time it's controversial, and people are going to watch. But this idea that the coverage of him is unfair, I just think continues to be ridiculous. Last night he made this comment about CNN where he said that, CNN is not even taking this speech live. I watched him say that on CNN. I was not in Arizona last night. So he blatantly will make misleading statements to try and convince his supporters that he isn't being treated fairly. And that doesn't do anyone a service. I remember being at Mike Pence's rally. He was at an event in Iowa a couple of months ago, and I was standing in the crowd, and the Republican chairman from Iowa made a joke about CNN not even covering the event. I've been in Iowa for 3 days.
Right.
I was standing in the crowd, and I heard one of the people say, "I can't believe CNN didn't show up to cover this." And I said to him, "Sir, I'm from CNN." So this idea, his supporters believe that when he makes these misleading statements, and that just grows and grows and grows, and that's where you have this distrust of these institutions. And in my opinion, he's contributing to that.
Yeah.
We've talked about McConnell, and previously we talked about Lindsey Graham. I caught Paul Ryan's town hall on CNN the other night with Jake Tapper. What role does he play in bringing some, what's the word I want to use? What role does he play in the Trump situation and maybe brokering a deal between all sides to advance an agenda?
Well, Paul Ryan seems like a man on an island here, where he is trying to cross this narrow divide of the controversial things that Donald Trump says, but the policies that he supports, and trying to bring them together in a way where he can get through this without damaging his long-term future as a politician.
Right.
And I think that Paul Ryan understands the reality of the situation, that Donald Trump is not a perfect agent. He's somebody with a lot of flaws who makes their lives more difficult, but he was also elected by the people, and he still has the broad support from their party. And there's a laundry list of things that Paul Ryan and Donald Trump agree on that he'd like to get accomplished. So Paul Ryan is never just going to throw Donald Trump overboard, because if he throws Donald Trump overboard, he's going to be left with a really damaged Republican Party that may take a generation to overcome, and it's just going to make the process more difficult. So, Ryan is a little bit more delicate, I think, with his handling of Trump and McConnell because he's kind of an affable person who gets along with all people. But, Jeff, we talk about this all the time. This idea that there's going to be some white knight that comes in either from the White House staff or from the Republican Congress or from the outside that's going to come in and right the Donald Trump ship, and that he's all of a sudden going to become somebody that can work with everyone and get everything accomplished, is a fantasy.
Right.
The Donald Trump that we saw during the campaign is the Donald Trump that we saw during the transition, that we saw in the first 100 days, that we are seeing now. It is not going to change. And if these Republicans in Congress can't find a way to work with him in his current form, which is a guy that's going to say controversial things, that's going to shoot from the hip, that lives and breeds a White House full of chaos, it's never going to happen, because this is who he is, and it's not going to change.
And we just had two recent situations prove that. Number one, General Kelly. Number two, what happened in Charlottesville. If there would ever been anything that would have made the president look in the mirror and say, wait a minute, I've got to reverse course here. I've got to change things up a little bit, and I'm going to listen. We saw in both cases a movement towards a change and then reverting back, and last night reverted right back, just like we kind of thought it was going to.
It just one more follow-up on Ryan. During that town hall, Paul Ryan was asked, how do you explain to your kids some of the things he says? I believe the audience member called Trump a bully, and Paul Ryan's answer was basically, I make sense of it this way. Trump is Trump, and I set the example for my children.
I thought that was a great answer. Yeah. Ryan, I want to ask you, if somebody's asking here, they say George Stephanopoulos. What do you think?
They say George Stephanopoulos?
This
what do you mean by
listener is saying, looking for a Democrat? I think George Stephanopoulos. I'm just saying.
To run for president?
To run for president. Apparently the reaction of Manasseh and Andrew is not a reaction that he would want. What do you think?
Well, George Stephanopoulos does have connections to Democratic campaigns, but I think he's proven himself to be a pretty fair and objective journalist over time. I know the president went after him last night, but yeah, I don't know.
Well, I got to tell you, I mean, not to John who put that in this morning, not to, I got to say, we had the same reaction. Actually, it was a far worse reaction when we heard Donald Trump was running. Who would have thought he'd be president of the United States?
That is a good point, Bill. I mean, I do think there is the real potential that the person that rises up to challenge Trump is not a traditional politician.
Out of the box.
That comes from a business leader. Is it somebody like Mark Zuckerberg from Facebook?
Yeah.
Is it The Rock, Dwayne Johnson? I mean, that sounds crazy, but that's the environment that we're in now. It could be just somebody who has a lot of fame or a lot of wealth. I mean, there's no doubt that Americans are sick of the political class. That is demonstrated. Donald Trump is the embodiment of that. So it's not out of the realm of possibility that it's somebody along those lines, not somebody that we're looking for that's currently a member of the U.S. Senate or a governor or somebody like that.
Andrew,
Ryan, I just want to address what you had talked about. Like, one of the only ways that Donald Trump would lose is to be defeated by a Democrat. But I think the other way that he would lose the White House would be to change who he is. And I'm not saying that for any other reason than that's the truth. If he were to change his tune, his tone, his delivery, the way he is, that's what would lose him his base and his supporters.
Well, Andrew, I think you're absolutely right. And, for all of us that criticize Donald Trump and claim that he's making bad choices, the fact of the matter is that Donald Trump looks at the world in a very binary way. You either win or you lose. And in his mind, he's never lost. Every time his name has been on a ballot, he's won. He doesn't view these congressional losses or the fact that he hasn't been able to get anything done in Congress. He doesn't view that as his fault. He's laying the blame on Mitch McConnell and Paul Ryan. Now, maybe he's not interpreting that correctly, but why, if you were Donald Trump, would you change anything you've done up until this point because you yourself to still be winning? You see these enormous crowds. You see the coverage that you're getting on television. Those are all things that feed his long-term goals. So I think you're right, Andrew. The reason that he's still drawing these big crowds is because he remains who he is. His authenticity, or his version of authenticity, is what draws people to his campaign. Now, his problem is that's only about 35% of America, but that 35% isn't going anywhere. And when you've got rock-solid 35% support, you can build on that, and it is very difficult to topple that.
Well, Paul Ryan better get doubling down on teaching his kid it's not winning, it's how you play the game. So he better really push that hard, because the message right now is it's all about winning. It doesn't matter how you play the game, just win. And, boy, that's what parents are left to deal with. I hate to say it, but with this president, because it doesn't matter how he plays the game. No one is is exempt from being targeted by the president.
Yeah, he's definitely an end justify the means kind of person.
Yeah,
whatever it takes to get to to his end goal, that's what he's going to do.
All right, interesting, Ryan. We'll talk again next week. We'll see you on TV. Ryan Nobles from CNN. Thanks.
Thanks, guys. Have a great day.
Quick break. We'll come back.